He was dressed like any other traveler, hood up, headphones on, boarding pass in hand. But when the flight attendant told him, "You don't belong here," the words didn't just echo in first class, they ignited a firestorm across the globe. Within 48 hours, a Fortune 500 airline would collapse, a billion-dollar lie would unravel, and a Hollywood icon would confront a world that still hadn't learned to see him for who he truly was. What did Michael B. Jordan do after they kicked him out of first class? And why did he smile as they escorted him off the plane? Michael B. Jordan stood at the threshold of first class, the kind of figure most people wouldn't expect to see without an entourage. Wearing a hoodie, joggers, and a plain black backpack, he blended in like any other frequent flyer. That was the intention. He didn't want to be recognized, not today. The boarding process was chaotic, flight attendants juggling impatient travelers, the intercom buzzing with gate changes, and the stale scent of recirculated air hanging like a curtain. He handed over his boarding pass without a word, expecting the beep and nod that came with every other boarding. But this time, the scanner blinked red. "Sir, this can't be right," the attendant said with forced politeness. Michael calmly explained that it was a first-class ticket under a pseudonym, standard practice for high-profile celebrities avoiding attention. The woman's brows furrowed. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Her voice carried. People looked up from their phones. Michael hesitated, then moved quietly to the side. Moments later, she returned, flanked by a second attendant and a uniformed gate agent. "You're not authorized to sit in first class. This ticket doesn't belong to you." He tried to speak, to explain, to show the confirmation email from his phone, but her voice cut through louder this time. "I said, step away. This area is for first-class passengers only." The words stung, not for what they said, but how they said it. Disbelief rippled through the crowd. Nearby, a teenage girl had begun recording, sensing something was off. Michael's expression remained unreadable, composed. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, turned, and walked toward economy. The girl's phone captured every step, the disbelief in her whispered commentary, the gasps from nearby passengers, the indifferent smirk of the attendant. In under 2 minutes, Michael B. Jordan had been publicly demoted by people who had no idea who he was. That clip would be watched 87 million times before the airline realized what had happened. What no one could see in that moment, what the camera didn't catch, was the subtle change in Michael's demeanor as he sat down near the rear of the plane. The weight of past humiliations wasn't new to him. But something about this incident, it scratched deeper. And it wouldn't be long before the world felt the ripples. Michael didn't post about it. He didn't lash out on Twitter. He didn't even speak to the girl who had recorded it. He simply stared ahead, earbuds in, silent as the engines roared to life. The flight took off on time. But the countdown to catastrophe had already begun. 3 weeks before the flight that would spark international outrage, Michael B. Jordan stood at the edge of a stage, watching the final rehearsal of a speech he would never give. The ballroom was opulent, velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, rows of white chairs that gleamed under stage lights. It was meant to be the launch of his most ambitious philanthropic initiative to date, Future First, a global education fund aimed at underprivileged black youth, supported by some of the world's biggest corporations. He had spent a year quietly assembling it, pouring his own money, time, and reputation into the project. But just days before the event, one of the corporate partners, an airline, backed out without warning. Their legal team cited public relations misalignment, but Michael wasn't naive. He knew the coded language, the hesitation, the carefully crafted statements meant to avoid headlines. He didn't just lose a sponsor, he lost $80 million in pledged support. And worse, they pulled out after demanding revisions to his keynote speech, asking him to remove any language that made their high-net-worth passengers uncomfortable. He'd never felt rage quite like that before. Not even in Hollywood, where double standards and subtle racism came gift-wrapped in compliments and contracts. This was different. This was direct. This was erasure. He cancelled the event the same night, shut off his phone, and drove until he hit the coast. For 2 days, he stayed at a small Airbnb with no service, walking the beach barefoot, eating nothing but oranges and crackers, replaying every conversation from the last year in his head. When he returned to Los Angeles, His team begged him to go public. The PR strategy was ready. Interviews were lined up. They had celebrities willing to back him. But Michael didn't want the noise. He didn't want to play the media game. What he wanted was space, to think, to feel, to understand how the world still saw him after everything. So, he made a decision: disappear in plain sight. No handlers, no stylists, no press alerts. He told his assistant to book a commercial flight under a private alias. He wanted to be just another face in the terminal, just another traveler trying to get somewhere else. He chose that specific airline not because he trusted them, but because he wanted to see who they were when no one was watching. There was a twisted sort of curiosity, a test he didn't realize he was giving them until later. He declined his usual black car pickup and took a ride-share from his modest rental in Venice Beach. He wore an old hoodie, grey joggers, and a pair of worn Nikes. No chains. No entourage. No sunglasses to signal status. The only thing in his backpack was a book of James Baldwin essays, a bottle of water, and his phone. It was a strange kind of freedom, the kind that only comes from blending into the background. At the airport, he checked in without fanfare, passed through security like any other passenger, and sat in the lounge silently sipping green tea while corporate travelers traded spreadsheets over wine. He overheard one man loudly joke about diversity theater while scrolling through his phone, and Michael didn't flinch. He was used to these rooms, used to being both invisible and watched at the same time. When the flight was called for boarding, he moved quietly with the first-class group, keeping his head down, earbuds in, doing everything right. But it wasn't enough. All the quiet in the world couldn't drown out the fact that to some, he simply didn't look like he belonged. What the flight attendant didn't know, and what made it all sting sharper, was that Michael had once been flown first class by that same airline to receive a humanitarian award. They had sent a car, a concierge, even a handwritten note thanking him for representing progress. He still had the note. He'd kept it in a drawer, beside old scripts and childhood photos, a reminder that not every place he walked into was built to reject him. That drawer had been locked ever since the charity debacle. Something inside him changed after that night. The world had always tested his patience, but this felt like a final exam. So when she said those words, "You're not authorized to sit here," it didn't just bruise his ego. It resurrected something deeper. It confirmed a truth too many people like him already knew. No amount of money, fame, or philanthropy could fully shield you from being underestimated. And for Michael, that realization wasn't new. But it had never felt this cold. As he took his seat in the back of the plane, the tension didn't fade. It calcified into something harder, something more useful. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet humiliation would become the thread that unraveled an empire, and stitched together a movement far bigger than his original foundation ever could. The teenager who captured the incident on her phone had no idea what she'd caught. At the time, she thought she was filming just another awkward public moment. Celebrity or not, the injustice of watching someone be humiliated over misunderstanding was something the internet always ate up. Her name was Ayla, 16, quiet, observant, and more comfortable behind a phone screen than in front of it. She uploaded the clip that evening while waiting for her luggage, still unsure if it was actually Michael B. Jordan. The title was simple: "This man got kicked out of first class for no reason. Anyone know who he is?" Within 30 minutes, the views trickled in. By the time her family reached their hotel, her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Someone confirmed it was him. Then another person posted a side-by-side photo. Then a blue checkmark reposted the video with the caption, "There's no way they just did that to Michael B. Jordan." From there, the fuse was lit. By midnight, "They did what to Michael" was trending worldwide. Ayla had accidentally detonated a cultural bomb. Mainstream outlets scrambled to pick up the story. TMZ was the first to publish a piece, followed by BuzzFeed, The Guardian, and CNN. By morning, news tickers around the globe carried variations of the same headline: "Actor Michael B. Jordan reportedly ejected from first class in viral video." The clip was analyzed frame by frame, slowed down, subtitled, and reposted across every social platform. TikTok users stitched reaction videos. Instagram was flooded with posts demanding answers. Celebrities chimed in, some with vague outrage, others with searing directness. Viola Davis tweeted a single word, unacceptable. Ava DuVernay posted the clip with the caption, "We see you." Even LeBron James weighed in, "Still happening. Still disgusting." The airline, once flying high on loyalty and prestige, was now in the crosshairs of a public execution, and they didn't even know it yet. In their ivory tower of boardrooms and spin doctors, the airline's leadership was slow to react. The social media manager posted a template response, "We're aware of a recent video involving one of our flights. We're investigating." It was a mistake, a hollow, tone-deaf misfire that only fanned the flames. People flooded the comments with screenshots of the video, tagging the company's sponsors, demanding accountability. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. #boycott Skyworld, #justice for Michael, #flying while black. The company tried to delete their tweet, but the internet had already immortalized it. Within hours, screenshots of the post became memes, weaponized artifacts of corporate apathy. Behind the scenes, panic set in. Executives convened emergency meetings, PR firms were called at 3 a.m., lawyers drafted statements they never thought they'd need. The flight attendant in question, whose name was now circulating widely, was placed on administrative leave, but the internal email leaked before they could control the narrative. It revealed a sanitized summary of the incident that failed to mention Michael's name and instead referred to him as a disruptive passenger who could not verify credentials. This only deepened the outrage. It wasn't just about the incident anymore. It was about the pattern. Commenters began sharing their own stories of racial profiling on flights, of being asked to show ID twice, of being stared at, questioned, belittled. The dam had broken, and what poured out wasn't just anger, it was collective memory. Still, Michael said nothing. Not a tweet, not a statement, not a comment. His silence became its own kind of message. News anchors speculated endlessly. Was he preparing a lawsuit? Was he working with civil rights organizations? Was he negotiating behind closed doors? The truth was quieter, simpler. He was watching, listening, absorbing the world's reaction not as a celebrity, but as a man who had seen this storm before and knew its course. And in that quiet, something unusual happened. The public didn't turn on him. They leaned in. His silence created a vacuum that people filled with meaning, with empathy, with resolve. He didn't need to explain himself. The world had already drawn its conclusions. Meanwhile, Ayla's original post reached 28 million views in under 24 hours. She gave her first interview to a podcast hosted by 2 college students. She described how surreal it felt to become the accidental witness to history. "He was just so calm," she said. "Like he wasn't even surprised. That's what messed me up. It was like he'd been through it before." That one quote, circulated through dozens of articles, cut through more than any statement Michael could have made. The story had evolved into something bigger than him. It was no longer just about celebrity mistreatment. It was about every quiet injustice ignored, every indignity brushed aside. The airline CEO finally stepped in with a public statement 2 days later. Standing before a polished blue backdrop bearing the company's logo, he read from a teleprompter with carefully measured regret. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight 1463. We are committed to reviewing our protocols and ensuring that every passenger is treated with dignity." But his performance couldn't compete with the rawness of the original footage. The internet pounced. One user summed it up best: "They didn't say sorry to Michael. They said sorry to the internet." It was too little, too late. The apology didn't spark forgiveness, it sparked fury. And still, Michael said nothing. By the end of the week, the airline's stock had dropped 11%. Celebrity partners began pulling out of promotional deals. One fashion brand cancelled an upcoming collaboration with them, citing misalignment of values. Whistleblowers inside the company started leaking emails, revealing a disturbing track record of internal complaints about biased training procedures and profiling practices. The public no longer wanted apologies. They wanted answers. And what they found next would rattle the foundation of a corporate empire. The fall didn't start with a crash. It began with a shiver, One felt first by investors scanning early morning tickers and noticing a slight dip in Skyworld Airline stock price. Nothing alarming yet, just enough to raise eyebrows. But by the time markets closed, that dip had turned into a landslide. Shares plummeted nearly 17% in a single day, wiping out over $2 billion in market value. Wall Street analysts scrambled to explain the volatility, citing PR turbulence, but behind their euphemisms, one truth was clear: the company was bleeding. Institutional investors began offloading shares. Airline competitors issued subtle statements reinforcing their commitment to equality and diversity, a veiled swipe that everyone recognized. Quietly, hedge funds started circling, betting on a long-term decline. The viral video wasn't just a PR hiccup anymore, it was an existential threat. And Skyworld's boardroom was starting to feel it in full. Inside the company's gleaming headquarters in Atlanta, panic had evolved into paralysis. The executive floor, usually humming with quiet confidence, was now a graveyard of unread memos and discarded strategy plans. An internal investigation had been launched, but the findings were more damning than anyone expected. Hidden within training modules were scripts that advised staff to verify identity discreetly when passenger appearance does not match class behavior. The language was vague enough to avoid scrutiny but specific enough to breed profiling. That document leaked 2 days later. The headline read, "Skyworld Training Encouraged Bias, Leaked Manual Confirmed Suspicions." The story snowballed. Employees past and present began coming forward. Anonymous testimonials described systemic issues: black and brown passengers being moved, questioned, second-guessed, or randomly selected at statistically impossible rates. One former gate agent revealed she was reprimanded for allowing non-traditional passengers into the premium lounge. The floodgates were wide open. Then came the boycotts. Celebrities who once smiled in Skyworld commercials denounced the company. Grammy-winning artists pulled their music from in-flight playlists. High-profile influencers deleted brand-sponsored posts. The entertainment industry blacklisted Skyworld from red carpet travel partnerships. Oprah released a video calling for reform. Denzel Washington declined a luxury flight upgrade, posting a photo of his economy seat with the caption, "Character flies coach." The symbolism landed harder than any speech. Every day, new headlines added fuel. Senator demands inquiry into airline bias. Civil rights lawyers join forces against Skyworld. Even airlines abroad began re-evaluating their code-share agreements, afraid of being associated with the spiraling PR disaster. The world wasn't just watching, it was acting. Through it all, Michael remained silent. His silence had become a force in itself, a haunting absence that echoed louder than the company's polished statements. Every hour he remained quiet, speculation swirled. People projected their own feelings into that void. Some saw strategy, others saw grief, and many saw quiet fury. But in the absence of a quote, a tweet, or an interview, the public conversation took on a life of its own. Think pieces filled editorial columns. Protesters gathered at airports. Activist investors demanded leadership resignations. Skyworld's annual shareholder meeting, typically a stale affair of numbers and projections, turned into a battlefield. A motion to remove the CEO gained traction. Security was doubled. One protester outside held up a sign that simply read, "How many first-class tickets does it take to be treated like a human?" Then came the data leak. A disgruntled employee uploaded internal communications to an encrypted whistleblower site, and within hours, journalists unearthed gold. Emails between executives showed top brass discussing how to manage the optics rather than address the root issue. One message in particular went viral: "Let's wait this out. These things fade after a few days." It was dated 3 days after the incident. The arrogance was nuclear. Public trust, already on life support, flatlined. The CEO was cornered. Facing board pressure and mounting shareholder rage, he announced an emergency press conference. The room was packed with journalists and protesters outside, chanting. He took the stage, his tie slightly askew, his voice tight. "I'm deeply sorry," he began. "I take full responsibility." But it didn't matter anymore. Apologies couldn't plug the crater. In an act of desperation, The board approved a public rebranding campaign. Billboards sprang up in major cities with slogans like "A New Sky World Starts Today" and "Flying Forward Together." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The campaign backfired. Protesters graffitied the posters. Social media mocked the new logo. Employees walked out. A former marketing director even posted a TikTok video breaking down how the rebranding budget could have instead funded racial equity training for the entire company, twice over. The backlash was merciless, and rightly so. The public wasn't interested in cosmetic changes. They wanted accountability. Real change. And the one person who hadn't said a word yet was the one everyone wanted to hear from. Then, an invitation arrived at Michael's doorstep. A request to speak at the Global Aviation Leadership Summit in Geneva. The most powerful people in the travel industry would be there. CEOs, regulators, investors. It was the kind of invitation no actor had ever received before. Michael didn't reply. He simply showed up, unannounced, stepping onto a global stage not as a performer, but as the quiet storm that had reshaped an industry without saying a single word. And still, no one knew what he was going to do next. The summit stage was a sterile, corporate affair. White lights, neutral carpeting, and a row of 6 empty chairs arranged like props in a boardroom theater. The Global Aviation Leadership Summit was not known for drama. It was a polished gathering of CEOs, regulators, and dignitaries from every continent, a who's who of suits who moved billions with a single nod. But this year, tension buzzed in the air like static before a storm. For the first time in its history, the summit's keynote slot had been handed not to a policy architect or a tech innovator, but to an actor. And not just any actor, Michael B. Jordan, the man whose silence had become a catalyst for a corporate reckoning that brought one of the world's largest airlines to its knees. There were murmurs as he entered the room. No entourage, no dramatic pause, just a calm walk to center stage. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, his demeanor steady. The only sound was the faint shuffle of cameras adjusting and a dozen CEOs holding their breath. He didn't begin with a greeting or a joke. He didn't thank anyone for the invitation. He simply said, "You saw the video." Then he paused. That silence, practiced and heavy, dragged the audience forward in their seats. "But what you didn't hear," he continued, "was everything else that was said when the camera stopped recording." The room went still. In his hand, he held a small device, a phone. He tapped it once, and through the speakers came a recording. The audio was grainy, but clear. The voice of the flight attendant crackled through, "You're not the kind of person we usually have up here." There was a pause, followed by a second voice, another attendant, laughing awkwardly and whispering, probably upgraded himself or stole it. Gasps spread through the room like a wave crashing against marble. This was no longer a conversation about optics. This was evidence. Michael let the recording finish without commentary. "I recorded that moment not because I was planning to expose anyone," he said, "but because I've learned over the years that truth has a tendency to be rewritten unless it's preserved in real time." He paced slowly, his voice calm but growing firmer. "I could have sued. I could have taken a settlement, written a statement, posted a black square. But none of that changes the system that trained those people to look at me and see a problem instead of a passenger." The room, filled with industry titans who once dismissed the incident as a temporary PR nightmare, now sat stone-faced. What happened on that plane wasn't about one mistake. It was a mirror. And most of you didn't like what you saw. He shifted gears, dropping his prepared notes. "Let me be clear, I don't want your apologies. I want your infrastructure to change." Then he turned toward the panel of airline CEOs, many of whom were seated in the front row, their faces tight. "I'm issuing a challenge, publicly, here and now. Audit your hiring, your training, your internal complaints. Release the data. Show the world how your systems treat people who don't fit your image of what premium looks like." Murmurs erupted. Journalists typed furiously. One CEO whispered something into his aide's ear. Michael didn't flinch. "If you don't," he continued, "then understand this. Passengers have power. And now they've seen what it looks like when that power wakes up." But then came the twist, one no one expected. Michael reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "This," he said, "is an offer I received 2 weeks ago. From your industry." He opened the letter. A private meeting, a generous donation to my foundation, and a promise to move forward together, in exchange for silence. He held the letter high. I declined. The audience erupted. Some gasped, others looked to the back of the room where senior PR heads began frantically texting. "I don't want your hush money," he said. "I want your discomfort. Because that's where change begins." His voice lowered now, soft but deliberate. "I was kicked out of first class, but this isn't about seating. It's about standing. And where you choose to stand when no one is recording." Then, with the world watching, he dropped one final revelation. There was someone else on that flight. In first class. Who recognized me, who said nothing, who later emailed me to apologize privately. He paused. "That person is a board member of Skyworld Airlines." Audible gasps filled the room. He saw everything. Did nothing. The board member in question, seated 3 rows back, visibly paled as every camera in the room turned toward him. "This isn't just about ignorance," Michael said. "It's about complicity." He closed the speech with no applause line, no hopeful crescendo. Just a single, devastating truth. "This isn't the first time. But it's going to be the last time I stay quiet." Then he stepped off the stage and walked away, not backstage, but straight out of the summit hall, leaving behind an audience too stunned to react. The video of the speech went live within minutes. Not just the words, but the room's reactions. The fear, the shame, the silence. It was dissected in real time, translated into multiple languages, and rebroadcast by every major outlet. Analysts called it the most consequential 10 minutes in corporate accountability history. Within 48 hours, Skyworld's board held an emergency session behind closed doors. The board member named in the speech resigned. A class action lawsuit was announced. For Michael, the war was never about that one flight, it was about dismantling an altitude built on exclusion. And now, the descent had begun. The week after Michael's speech, Skyworld's stock lost nearly half its value. What had once been a $42 billion behemoth was now a company in free fall, hemorrhaging investor confidence and public goodwill by the hour. News networks ran looped clips of his address, not just in the United States, but across the world. From BBC to Al Jazeera, Tokyo to Johannesburg, Michael's voice echoed in boardrooms and homes alike. The board tried to mitigate the damage, issuing sweeping promises of reform, placing the CEO on indefinite leave, launching a high-profile diversity and inclusion task force, but it was all reactive, all too late. People didn't want symbolism. They wanted consequence. Then came the class action filings, led not just by civil rights attorneys, but by a coalition of impacted passengers, former employees, and advocacy organizations. The plaintiffs alleged systemic racial discrimination, gross negligence, and defamation. Analysts estimated the suits, along with breach of contract terminations from major partners, would cost the airline more than $500 million over the next year. But money wasn't the deepest wound. Reputation was. Within a month, over 200,000 customers had cancelled upcoming flights. Multiple corporate clients, including a major tech giant, cut their annual contracts, citing the company's failure to respond with integrity. Skyworld's loyalty program, once a crown jewel of elite travel, became a public relations liability. Influencers posted videos cutting up their platinum membership cards. Flight crews leaked internal chats showing how morale had cratered. One message simply read, "They told us to smile more." That was the solution. Even rival airlines, sensing blood in the water, launched aggressive ad campaigns capitalizing on the chaos. Billboards along major highways read, "Dignity at 30,000 feet, fly with us instead." In less than 60 days, Skyworld had gone from industry leader to cautionary tale. And still, Michael B. Jordan refused to take a victory lap. He declined every interview. He refused every talk show offer. He turned down awards from civil rights organizations, brand endorsements, even a proposed documentary deal. Instead, he disappeared from the public eye altogether, retreating from the spotlight with the same quiet conviction he had walked into it. What most people didn't know was that while the world chased him for commentary, he was building something else, something larger than a speech, longer lasting than a headline. A new non-profit quietly filed incorporation documents under the name Boarding Pass, a youth travel and education fund designed to give disadvantaged students first-hand access to global experiences. The idea was simple but radical. The first-class seat wasn't just a symbol of luxury, it was a metaphor for access. And Michael was determined to open the cabin door. The organization launched without fanfare. No press release. No red carpet. Just a simple website with a mission: to sponsor travel programs, leadership seminars, and international fellowships for young people historically excluded from global opportunity. Within weeks, donations poured in. Not from corporations seeking image rehabilitation, but from everyday people, teachers, nurses, artists, moved by what Michael had stood for. The first cohort included students from Newark, Detroit, and rural Mississippi. Their trip: a 12-country educational tour exploring culture, history, and diplomacy. When the first group returned home, they didn't talk about airports or airlines. They talked about being seen, being heard, being allowed to take up space they had been told wasn't meant for them. Quietly, Michael also funded legal workshops for travelers who had experienced discrimination and created a fellowship for former flight attendants of color who had been pushed out of the industry. He never made a statement. He didn't have to. His actions had become the message. And while Skyworld's executives scrambled to rehabilitate their image, offering scholarships, rebranding flight routes, and replacing their marketing agency, none of it reversed the damage. Travelers never forgot the video. The speech. The look on the attendant's face. The silence in the boardroom. The truth was embedded in culture now, beyond repair. Years later, the moment would still be referenced in corporate training slides, keynote lectures, and diversity panels. Business schools studied the incident as a case in branding ethics and social power. One Harvard professor summarized it best: they didn't just lose money. They lost the right to define what their brand meant. And in the end, Michael never said "I told you so." He didn't need to. The final image of him that most remembered wasn't from a movie or an award stage. It was of him stepping off that summit platform, head held high, walking past executives whose world had just been cracked open. Not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. What's left unsaid is what stayed with people most. That despite every opportunity to capitalize, monetize, or grandstand, Michael chose a different altitude. One where legacy wasn't measured by applause, but by the echo it left in its silence. The airline lost $500 million. But what they lost in trust, they may never regain. And Michael B. Jordan, forever known for what he didn't say, became the quiet architect of a reckoning no one saw coming, yet everyone needed.